It was 10:43 p.m. when Michael's phone buzzed with a message that would change his life forever. The text was from Sophia, his girlfriend of 3 years. It read, "I need you. Someone's following me. Please, come now. Don't call the police. Just hurry." The message sent Michael's heart racing. Sophia never sounded like this. Her confident, composed demeanor had dissolved into panic within those few words. He barely had time to think before a second message came in. "He's outside my apartment. Don't let him hurt me." Without hesitation, Michael grabbed his keys and bolted out the door. He didn't question why she didn't want the police involved. He only knew she needed him, and he would do anything for her. He drove through the empty streets, his mind racing with scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. Who was this man? Why was he after Sophia? And why did she think Michael could stop him? By the time he arrived at her building, sweat was dripping down his temples despite the cold night air. Sophia lived on the 3rd floor of a modest complex, but tonight the place felt eerie. The streetlights flickered, and the parking lot was eerily silent. He scanned the area but saw no one suspicious. Michael took the stairs 2 at a time, his adrenaline fueling him. When he reached her door, it was already ajar. He pushed it open cautiously, calling out her name. "Sophia?" No answer. Her apartment was dimly lit, and the living room looked undisturbed. But there was something off, an unsettling silence that made the hairs on his neck stand up. He moved further inside, his eyes darting around, looking for any sign of terror. The man she said was after her. On the kitchen counter, he spotted her phone, left carelessly next to an overturned glass of wine. That wasn't like her. Sophia was meticulous about her belongings. Why would she leave her phone behind in the middle of a crisis? Suddenly, Michael's own phone buzzed again. A new message from Sophia. "He's inside." The words froze him in place. He turned slowly, his pulse pounding in his ears.
Was this a trap?
"Michael," her voice called softly from the bedroom. Relief flooded him. She was here. Safe. He rushed to the bedroom door, but as he reached for the handle, something caught his eye, a single red rose lying on the floor, its petals crushed. He hesitated. Pushing the door open, he found the room empty. The window was wide open, letting in the cold night air. On the bed was a folded piece of paper. He picked it up, his hands trembling. The note read, "Do you trust me?" His phone buzzed again. Another message. "Don't move. Watch the window." Michael stepped closer to the window, his breath visible in the icy air. Across the street, he saw a figure standing in the shadows, a man wearing a black hoodie, his face obscured. The man raised his hand, pointing directly at Michael's window. Then he disappeared into the darkness. Panic gripped him. Michael turned back to the note in his hand, his mind spiraling with confusion. This didn't feel like someone trying to protect themselves. Sophia's voice echoed in his mind. Before he could process, his phone buzzed again. This time, the message was chilling. "He's watching you now. Prove your loyalty. Go downstairs." Loyalty? To what? To who? Michael didn't know what was happening, but he felt trapped. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to run, but something stronger, a mix of love, fear, and confusion, kept him rooted. He made his way downstairs, each step heavier than the last. The parking lot was empty, except for a single beat-up sedan with its headlights off. He approached cautiously, his fists clenched. As he neared the car, the driver's side door creaked open. A man stepped out. He was middle-aged, with a scruffy beard and a wild look in his eyes. He didn't speak. He only stared at Michael. Michael's phone buzzed again. Another message. "Do what I told you. End this." The man took a step toward him, and Michael reacted without thinking. He swung his fist, catching the man off guard. The man stumbled back, but didn't fight. Instead, he laughed a low, menacing chuckle that made Michael's blood run cold. "You don't even know, do you?" the man said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Know what?" Michael demanded, his voice shaking. But before the man could answer, a car sped into the parking lot, its tires screeching. Michael turned to see Sophia in the passenger seat, her face pale. The driver was someone Michael didn't recognize, a man who didn't look like a threat, but didn't seem like a savior either. The car stopped abruptly, and Sophia got out. She didn't run to Michael. She didn't explain. She only said one thing: get in the car. Now, if you are finding this story intriguing, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to stay updated with more gripping true crime stories. Don't forget to comment below with your thoughts. What do you think of this shocking twist? And share this video with someone who loves a good mystery. Let us jump back in the story. Michael sat in the back seat of the car, his mind racing as the man driving stared straight ahead, silent and stern. Sophia sat beside him, her face void of the panic he'd expected. Instead, she looked calm, too calm. It unsettled him. Michael turned to her, trying to piece together the night's events. Who was that guy? What's going on, Sophia? He asked, his voice trembling with anger and confusion. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulled out a cigarette, and lit it with hands that didn't shake. She exhaled slowly before finally turning to him. He was dangerous, Michael. I told you that. You handled it. Michael blinked, stunned. Handled it? He could have told me what was happening. Who is he? Sophia's eyes narrowed, and her voice took on a sharp edge. You're not listening to me. He was dangerous. That's all you need to know. You did what you were supposed to do. The word stung. Supposed to do? What did that even mean? Michael had always been protective of Sophia. She had a way of making him feel needed, like her safety depended on him alone. But now, that feeling didn't comfort him. It felt like a chain tightening around his neck. The driver finally spoke, his voice gruff and emotionless. You two need to lie low for a while. This won't go away easily. Michael turned to him, anger boiling over. Who the hell are you? Why are you even here? The man glanced at him through the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. I'm here because she called me. That's all you need to know. Sophia placed a hand on Michael's knee, her touch soft but firm. Michael, I need you to trust me. Everything I'm doing is for us. Michael wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that the woman he loved wasn't dragging him into something he couldn't escape. But his gut told him otherwise. As the car sped through the city, Michael replayed the last few months in his head. He thought about the subtle changes in their relationship, how Sophia had started isolating him from his friends, convincing him that they didn't understand their love. He remembered the way she would make him feel guilty for questioning her, always framing her actions as sacrifices for their relationship. And then there were the stories. Sophia often spoke about how she'd been wronged in the past by friends, by family, even by strangers. She painted herself as a victim of the world, someone who could only rely on Michael. At first, he found it endearing, even flattering, that she saw him as her protector. But now, those stories felt like something else entirely. A strategy. The car pulled into an old industrial lot on the outskirts of town. The driver killed the engine, and they sat in silence for a moment. Michael looked around, his unease growing. Why are we here? Michael stared at the paper, his hands trembling. How did you even get this? Who gave you this? Sophia looked away, her jaw tightening. I can't tell you that. The less you know, the safer you are. Just trust me. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The man in the parking lot hadn't acted like a stalker. He hadn't tried to hurt him. If anything, it seemed like he wanted to say something important. Sophia stepped closer, her voice softening. Michael, I need you to understand something. You did what you had to do tonight. You kept me safe. That's all that matters. Michael felt trapped. Her words were like a fog clouding his judgment. He wanted to believe her, to trust that everything she said was true. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being used. As they left the building and returned to the car, Michael couldn't bring himself to look at Sophia. The weight of the night pressed down on him, suffocating and relentless. He didn't know what he'd gotten himself into, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't in control anymore. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped out of the car, the chill of the night air doing nothing to calm the storm of anxiety swirling inside him. He had never been this far from his comfort zone before, and yet, here he was, following Sophia's orders, in a situation that made no sense. As the car doors slammed shut behind him, The figure of the man, scruffy, disheveled, stood in the shadows, his eyes unreadable. Michael felt his hand instinctively curl into a fist. What had he been dragged into? He had followed Sophia's instructions, gotten in the car, and come to this desolate industrial lot. But nothing about the situation made any sense. He tried to steady his breath, but the lump in his throat wouldn't go away. What was Sophia not telling him? Why did she trust this stranger? And why had she made him confront the man in the parking motif that even was the same man? The questions circled his mind, but none of them had answers. The stranger, the one who had followed him outside earlier, slowly approached, his expression still unreadable. Michael's legs felt heavy, as if the ground itself were weighing him down. The man didn't move with urgency, but there was a calm about him, an unsettling calm that made Michael's stomach twist. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension, as Michael's mind raced. Michael wanted to ask the man why he had followed him, why he had gotten involved in this twisted scenario, but no words came. Instead, he found himself watching the stranger's movements, his eyes darting to the shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally around them. There was something wrong here. This wasn't a random encounter. Michael was certain of it. The man's voice broke through the thick air. "You handled it well back there," he said, his tone colder than the night. "Better than I expected." Michael's confusion deepened. Handled it? He had barely done anything. "What do you mean?" Michael managed, his voice shaking. The stranger tilted his head, his lips curling into a faint smile. "You did what you were supposed to. You kept her safe." "Her? What are you talking about? Who are you?" Michael's breath came quicker now, panic rising in his chest. The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he turned and nodded toward the car. Michael followed reluctantly, the unease in his gut growing stronger with each step. He felt like a pawn, moving through a game that he didn't understand. Sophia was already in the passenger seat, her eyes trained ahead, her calm demeanor unchanged. The door shut behind Michael with a thud, and the car rolled forward, the dim lights of the city passing by like ghosts. Michael glanced at Sophia, still unsure of what was happening.
"Why didn't you tell me what was going on?"
he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't look at him at first, but then, slowly, she turned to him. "You handled it well, Michael," she said again, her voice almost soothing, as if she were congratulating him for something he still didn't understand. "What did you get me involved in?" Michael's voice cracked, his frustration breaking through the fear. "You never told me any of this. Who was that man? What did he want with you?" Sophia exhaled, looking out the window. "It's not what you think, Michael. He was dangerous. You did what you had to. That's all that matters." The car turned down a side street and slowed. Michael's grip tightened on the seat, his thoughts racing. Sophia's words didn't make sense. She had built this whole scenario, made him believe in a threat that wasn't real, manipulated him into violence. He had attacked the man in the parking lot without knowing why, and now he was being told it was the right thing to do. But he didn't feel right. Nothing about this felt right. As the car came to a stop in front of a nondescript building, the stranger turned the engine off without a word. Michael could feel the weight of what he had done, a sinking feeling settling deep within his chest. He had crossed a linear line that couldn't be erased. Sophia opened the door and stepped out, motioning for Michael to follow. He hesitated for a moment, staring at the building ahead. The familiar world he had known seemed so far away now. Sophia led him inside, her steps echoing in the narrow hallway. Inside the building, the dim light cast shadows across the walls, and the air felt stale. Michael's gaze fell to a dusty table in the center of the room, where a stack of papers lay. Sophia picked up the top sheet, her fingers brushing over it as she handed it to Michael. He looked down at the photograph of the same man from the parking lot. His face was circled in red ink, and below it was a dossier filled with details about his life. "Who is this?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse. Sophia's gaze was cold as she answered. "He wasn't just following me, he was stalking me for months. You did what you had to do." Michael's mind spun. She had lied to him. The man hadn't been a random stranger. He had been a stalker, someone who had been watching them for far longer than Michael had realized. The pieces fell into place, but the truth was a cruel revelation. Sophia had manipulated him into committing murder. The realization settled in his gut like poison. Before he could speak, Sophia's voice cut through the fog in his mind. "You kept me safe, Michael. That's what matters." But Michael felt anything but safe. He felt trapped. Days passed, but the unease in Michael never waned. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. He had believed Sophia when she said he had done the right thing, but the guilt gnawed at him. His thoughts were clouded by the weight of the man's blood on his hands, and the realization that Sophia's reassurances felt hollow. The more he replayed the events in his mind, the more questions arose. Who had really been in danger? Why hadn't Sophia been more forthcoming about the threat? Had the man in the parking lot really been stalking her, or had it all been a lie? The investigation began, and the police were quick to act. They had no leads, no clear motives, but their questions were becoming harder to ignore. Michael found himself in a web of confusion and suspicions. The stranger's body was found the next morning, a lifeless shell. But the authorities were clueless about what had happened. They began interviewing anyone connected to the incident, and Sophia's name. She was questioned about her relationship with the victim. But her alibi was solid, too solid. She had an answer for everything, a calm response to every question. It almost seemed rehearsed. Michael couldn't help but notice the way she handled the detective's inquiries, her cool demeanor almost bordering on indifference. It was as if she were playing a game, pulling the strings while everyone else was left in the dark. The more he watched her, the more it became clear Sophia was the mastermind behind everything. She had orchestrated the entire scenario, feeding him half-truths, building his trust, and slowly leading him to the inevitable conclusion. The stranger wasn't a threat. He had never been a threat. Michael was the pawn, and Sophia had used him to eliminate anyone who could expose her lie. As the detectives continued their investigation, Michael's suspicions grew. He kept his distance from Sophia, watching her every move, trying to piece together the truth. The more he observed, the more he saw the cracks in her story. The more he realized that her calm was nothing but a facade that was beginning to crumble as the truth drew close. The detectives were closing in, and Sophia's perfect game was starting to unravel. But Michael knew the truth too late. He had already been manipulated, and there was no way. The web she had spun was tight, and he was trapped. The investigation had reached a tipping point, and Michael's world was beginning to collapse. The detectives had pieced together the pieces of the puzzle, and it was clear to them now. They had zeroed in on Sophia, her motives slowly coming to light. Her alibi had been flawless, but her involvement was becoming undeniable. The more they dug into the stranger's past, the more they discovered that the man Michael had killed wasn't some random stalker, as Sophia had. He was connected to Sophia in ways Michael hadn't been. It wasn't a crime of self-defense. It was cold, calculated manipulation. The revelation hit Michael like a freight train. He finally understood the extent of Sophia's deceit. She had never been in danger. She had used him, manipulated him into doing her dirty. The stranger hadn't been a threat to her. He had been someone who knew too much about her past, someone who had started to unravel her secret. And Sophia had made sure that Michael would do her bidding, framing it all as a rescue mission. Michael was consumed by a mixture of anger and regret. He had been nothing more than a pawn in her game, and now, with the truth coming to light, he realized how deeply he had been betrayed. The police had enough evidence to charge her, but Sophia wasn't going to let herself be caught so easily. Her web had been carefully spun, and she wasn't about to let it unravel without a. She played the victim, spinning a new tale of her own innocence. But the truth was there, for everyone to see. She had tricked him into murder. Sophia's arrest was inevitable, but even as she was taken away, she maintained a calm demeanor, almost as if she had expected it all along. She had gotten what she wanted: control, manipulation, and now she would face the consequences. Michael, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered life, wondering how he could have been so blind. How did she convince him? How did she make him believe her lies so complete? But in the end, there was one question that lingered in Michael's mind, one that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Was he a victim, or had he chosen this fate, guided by his own weakness, manipulated by his love for someone who never truly